I am Natalie, 35, and I never thought my Stanford computer science degree would lead me to a corporate showdown worth $9 million. 4 years of dedication at Tech Fusion, countless sleepless nights, and it all came down to one contract clause nobody bothered to read. When the CEO Jeffrey called me into that conference room, his smile told me everything. They were going to fire me one day before my shares vested. Before I tell you how they tried to destroy everything I worked for, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe to hear more stories about corporate justice served cold. The journey that led me to that fateful day at Tech Fusion began nearly a decade ago. After graduating from Stanford with my computer science degree, I cut my teeth at several promising startups. While none of them reached unicorn status, they provided invaluable experience in how tech companies operate, scale, and sometimes fail. I built a reputation as someone who could solve complex algorithmic problems and translate them into practical business solutions. It was at a tech conference in San Francisco when Amanda Fisher, the Chief Technology Officer of Tech Fusion, approached me after my presentation on predictive analytics. Tech Fusion was making waves as an artificial intelligence company specializing in business process optimization, and Amanda painted an enticing picture of what my future could look like there. "We need someone with your skill set, Natalie," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Our growth trajectory is exceptional, and we plan to go public within 2 years. The equity package alone could change your life." The equity package she offered was indeed substantial, 0.5% of the company, with a 4-year vesting schedule. At the time, Tech Fusion was valued at around $400 million, making my potential stake worth about $2 million. Not life-changing, but certainly nothing to sneeze at. What really sold me was the accelerator clauses tied to performance metrics and company valuation. If we hit our targets and go public as planned, this package could be worth 5 times that amount, Amanda explained. Little did I know just how accurate her prediction would be. 2 years after I joined Tech Fusion went public at a valuation of $1.8 billion. Within months, the stock surged, pushing the company valuation above $3 billion, then $4 billion. By the time my vesting date approached, my 0.5% stake was worth approximately $9 million. The cast of characters at Tech Fusion included some memorable personalities. Jeffrey Morgan, the CEO, was a charismatic salesman type, with piercing blue eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. He had founded the company after a successful exit from his previous venture and had the confident swagger of someone accustomed to getting his way. Amanda, who had initially recruited me, was brilliant, but politically savvy to a fault. In the early days, we collaborated closely, and I considered her a mentor. As the company grew, I noticed her becoming increasingly distant, more aligned with Jeffrey and the board than with her engineering team. My closest ally at Tech Fusion was Rebecca Johnson, another senior engineer who had joined around the same time as me. Rebecca was perceptive and straight-talking, never one to sugarcoat reality or play office politics. Her friendship became my anchor as the company culture began to shift. Harold Peterson, the chief financial officer, was a numbers-obsessed executive in his late 50s who viewed engineers as necessary expenses rather than value creators. From day one, I sensed his cold calculation when he looked at me, as if mentally computing my cost to the company versus my output. He and I clashed occasionally over resource allocation for my projects, though I always came armed with data to support my requests. Rounding out the executive team was Vincent Taylor, the HR director, a smooth-talking corporate veteran who seemed to exist solely to execute Jeffrey's vision. He was the kind of person who could deliver terrible news with a smile, all while assuring you it was for the best. My contributions to Tech Fusion were undeniable. 6 months into my tenure, I developed a revolutionary optimization algorithm that became the cornerstone of our flagship product. This innovation increased client efficiency by an average of 40%, leading to a massive spike in sales and customer retention. Quarterly revenue jumped by 62% following the release of my algorithm, and I was publicly praised during the all-hands meeting. "The Morgan-Peterson algorithm is changing the game," Jeffrey announced, conveniently naming the technology after himself and Harold, rather than acknowledging its true creator. I let it slide focused on the work, rather than the credit. As TechFusion prepared for its IPO, my work became even more valuable. I led the technical presentations during the roadshow, explaining our technology to potential investors in terms they could understand and get excited about. Many later commented that these presentations were what convinced them to invest. The IPO was wildly successful, with the stock opening at $32 per share, well above the projected range of $20 to $24. Champagne flowed in the office that day, as everyone celebrated becoming paper millionaires, at least on their unvested shares. For the next 2 years, I continued to innovate and deliver results. My team expanded from 3 to 15 engineers, and we consistently outperformed targets. By all objective measures, I was a star performer deserving of my equity stake. But as my vesting date approached, I began to notice subtle shifts in the company dynamics. The camaraderie of the early days had given way to political maneuvering as executives jockeyed for power and recognition. The culture of innovation was gradually being replaced by a focus on short-term stock performance and cost-cutting. Little did I know that behind closed doors, discussions were already taking place about how the company might avoid paying out my increasingly valuable equity stake. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would test not just my financial security, but my very sense of justice and self-worth. The first sign that something was amiss came about 3 months before my vesting date. I noticed that my calendar invitations to the weekly executive strategy meetings suddenly stopped arriving. When I asked Amanda about it, she brushed it off as streamlining the meeting for core decision-makers, but her eyes darted away as she spoke. Around the same time, Rebecca pulled me aside after lunch one day, concern etched across her face. "Have you noticed anything strange lately?" she asked in a hushed tone. "Like being cut out of meetings," I replied. "Not just that. I overheard Harold talking to Vincent yesterday. They mentioned something about talent overhead reduction before the end of the quarter. Your name came up." A cold sensation spread through my chest, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they're just doing budget reviews. It's that time of year. Rebecca shook her head. It didn't sound like a general discussion. Harold specifically said, and I quote, "$9 million is an excessive payout for any single employee, no matter their contribution. They know exactly how much your shares are worth, Natalie." That night, I could barely sleep. The next morning, I reached out to Stephen, a former colleague who had left TechFusion 6 months earlier. We met for coffee at a spot far from the office. They pushed me out 2 weeks before my 1-year cliff, Stephen confirmed, stirring his latte absently. Said my performance wasn't meeting expectations despite having just received an excellent review the month before. It was only $50,000 worth of shares, nothing compared to what you have on the line. My suspicions growing, I decided to start documenting everything. I forwarded relevant emails to my personal account, took screenshots of performance reviews, and saved analytics, showing the impact of my work on the company's bottom line. I also began downloading copies of all the code I had written not to use elsewhere, but as evidence of my contributions. One evening while working late, I noticed Harold had left his laptop open when he stepped out for a call. A notification popped up on his screen with the subject line, Q4 Talent Overhead Reduction. I knew I shouldn't look, but self-preservation overrode my ethics in that moment. I quickly snapped a picture of the email with my phone. Later that night, I zoomed in on the image, and my blood ran cold. The email from Harold to Jeffrey and Vincent contained a spreadsheet of employees with vesting schedules and amounts. My name was highlighted in red with the note "Critical Financial Impact. Recommend review before vesting date." The next day, I called my brother-in-law, James Wilson. He was an attorney specializing in corporate law, who had casually reviewed my TechFusion contract when I first received it 4 years ago. "James, I think they're planning to fire me right before my shares vest," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let me pull up your contract," he said. There was silence on the line as he reviewed the document, then a thoughtful, "What is it?" I asked anxiously. "Do you remember the amendment I suggested to the vesting schedule wording?" he asked. I vaguely recalled him making some minor changes to the contract language before I signed, but I hadn't paid much attention to the details. I changed a small but significant detail, James explained. The standard contract said shares would vest after 4 years of continuous employment, but I modified it to read 4 calendar years from the effective date of this agreement. I also added language specifying that vesting occurs at 1:20 a.m. on the vesting date, not at business close. What does that mean practically? I asked. It means your shares legally vest at midnight the day before your official 4-year anniversary date, not at the end of the business day on your anniversary. My mind raced with this information, so if they try to fire me on the last day, the shares would already be legally yours, James confirmed. But listen, Natalie, don't tip your hand. If they are planning something, let them think their plan will work. I took his advice to heart and began a careful balancing act. At work, I maintained my usual professional demeanor while quietly preparing for the worst. I consulted with a securities attorney, Elizabeth Chen, who specialized in equity compensation disputes. Your contract modification is solid, Elizabeth assured me after reviewing the documents. The calendar day versus business day distinction is clearly stated. If they terminate you after midnight on the day before your stated anniversary, the shares are yours. What if they try to claim I violated company policies or failed to perform my duties? I asked. That's why you need to be extra careful these next few months. Document every achievement. Get written confirmation of project completions. Be impeccable in your conduct. Give them no ammunition. Armed with this advice and the knowledge of my contractual protection, I felt a sliver of confidence returning. But the betrayal still stung deeply. These were people I had worked alongside for 4 years, people who had celebrated victories with me and relied on my innovations to build their company. Now they were plotting to cheat me out of compensation I had rightfully earned. As the weeks progressed, I noticed more concerning signs. My performance objectives suddenly became vaguer with subjective criteria that would be difficult to prove I had met. Projects were reassigned without explanation. Junior team members were instructed to report directly to Amanda, bypassing me. I documented each of these changes meticulously. At night, I would sometimes wake up in a cold sweat running through worst-case scenarios in my mind. $9 million was life-changing money, the kind that would secure my future and allow me to pursue projects I was passionate about, rather than those dictated by corporate interests. As my vesting date drew nearer, I marked the calendar April 15th. Thanks to James's foresight, my shares would legally vest at 1:20 a.m. on April 14th. I just needed to make it to the end of April 13th without being fired. The countdown had begun. With just 6 weeks remaining until my vesting date, the atmosphere at Tech Fusion became increasingly hostile. What had once been my professional home now felt like enemy territory, with dangers lurking around every corner. The first major escalation came during a quarterly review meeting. Harold presented financial projections that highlighted excessive compensation costs in the engineering department. While he never mentioned me by name, his eyes flicked meaningfully in my direction when he mentioned legacy equity arrangements that no longer align with current market valuations. After the meeting, I approached Amanda, hoping my former mentor might offer some clarity or reassurance. "Is there something I should know about my standing here?" I asked directly. Amanda's discomfort was palpable. She shifted in her seat and wouldn't meet my eyes. "Nothing specific, Natalie. The company is just reevaluating all compensation structures as we mature post-IPO. Standard procedure." It didn't feel standard when Harold was practically pointing at me while discussing excessive costs, I countered. "You're being paranoid," she said, but her tone lacked conviction. "Just keep doing your job well, and everything will work out as it should." Her choice of words, "as it should," rather than "as it was promised," spoke volumes. The following week, I was blindsided during a product development meeting when Jeffrey announced that my team's latest project would be handed over to a different department to ensure diverse input. This was a project I had conceptualized and led from the beginning, a potential game-changer for our client acquisition strategy. "We appreciate all your foundational work," Natalie, Jeffrey said with that same smile that never reached his eyes. "But fresh perspectives will take it to the next level." I maintained my composure, but inside I was seething. The move made no business sense and would likely delay the project by months as the new team got up to speed. Rebecca found me later in the break room, anger evident in her usually calm demeanor. That was completely uncalled for, she fumed. Everyone knows your team was the only one with the expertise to execute that project properly. It seems like they're building a case, I said quietly, checking to ensure we were alone, creating a narrative that I'm no longer adding sufficient value. It gets worse, Rebecca said, lowering her voice further. I was accidentally copied on an email chain about a secret executive retreat next week. The agenda includes a discussion topic called Engineering Leadership Restructuring Pre-Q2. The timing lines up exactly with your vesting date. That evening I couldn't focus on anything. The stress was beginning to affect my health. I developed insomnia, lost my appetite, and found myself jumping at small noises. My partner Michael became increasingly concerned. You can't let them do this to you, he said as I pushed food around my plate at dinner. The money is important, yes, but not at the cost of your well-being. It's not just about the money anymore, I admitted. It's the principle. I helped build Tech Fusion into what it is today. My algorithm is still the core of their main product line. They've made hundreds of millions off my work, and now they want to cheat me out of my fair share. Michael took my hand across the table. Then fight them. But do it smart, not just angry. Taking his advice, I called James again to strengthen my legal position. He suggested documenting any tasks I was removed from and projects I was excluded from, creating a paper trail of their apparent effort to diminish my role. I also scheduled a confidential meeting with Elizabeth, the securities lawyer. We met at a coffee shop 20 miles from the Tech Fusion office to avoid any chance encounters. Based on everything you've shared, they're clearly building pretextual justification for termination, Elizabeth said after reviewing my notes. But their timing will be crucial. If they fire you for cause, they might argue that it voids your equity agreement regardless of the date. How do I protect against that? I asked. Continue documenting everything. Be impeccable in your work. And most importantly, do not give them any ammunition. No long lunches, no coming in late, no using company resources for personal matters. Be the model employee. Elizabeth also advised me to prepare for worst-case scenarios. Set up a meeting with your broker to ensure the vesting process is automatic and clearly understood. Make sure they know to expect the shares to vest at 12:01 a.m. on April 14th. I followed her advice meticulously. I arrived early each day, stayed late, and documented every contribution. I became excessively formal in my communications, making sure everything was in writing. When forced to have verbal conversations, I would follow up with email summaries. As we discussed in our meeting today, 3 weeks before my vesting date, I was suddenly assigned to create detailed documentation for all my previous projects, ostensibly for knowledge transfer purposes. The request came directly from Vincent, in HR, with Jeffrey and Harold copied. This feels like they're preparing for my departure, I told Rebecca, during our now regular coffee walks outside the building. Absolutely they are, she agreed. But keep playing their game. Document everything beautifully. Give them no excuses. The stress continued to mount. I lost 7 pounds in 2 weeks and started experiencing panic attacks. Michael suggested I see a doctor who prescribed anti-anxiety medication to help me cope. Just a few more weeks, I reminded myself each morning as I swallowed the pill. Just make it a few more weeks. With 10 days remaining, I received an ominous calendar invitation, a performance review scheduled for April 13th, the day before my official anniversary date. The meeting was set for 4 in the afternoon with Jeffrey, Harold, and Vincent, all listed as attendees. No agenda was provided. The trap was set. They planned to fire me at the end of the day, on April 13th, believing they were just hours away from saving the company $9 million. Little did they know, thanks to James's foresight, my shares would vest at midnight that very morning. Now I just needed to make it through what promised to be the most excruciating day of my professional life without revealing that I already knew I had won. April 13th arrived with a strange sense of calm settling over me. After weeks of anxiety and sleepless nights, I now had clarity about what was coming. I dressed with particular care that morning, choosing a sleek charcoal pantsuit that made me feel powerful and composed. As Michael kissed me goodbye, he whispered, "Remember, no matter what happens today, we're celebrating tonight." I arrived at the Tech Fusion office earlier than usual at 7:30 a.m. The security guard Ralph nodded as I badged in. "Big day today, Miss Armstrong?" he asked casually. You could say that I replied with a small smile, wondering if even the security staff had gotten wind of what was planned for me. My desk had been partially cleared out the night before, with all personal items packed into a cardboard box that now sat on my chair. I had expected this, having been briefed by Rebecca that this was standard procedure for planned terminations. I calmly placed the box under my desk and powered on my computer for what would likely be the last time at Tech Fusion. At 8:15, my phone pinged with a text from my broker Thomas confirming what we already knew. Vesting occurred at 12:01 a.m. as scheduled. Shares now appear in your account. Congratulations. I allowed myself a brief moment of satisfaction before diving into work. Today was about playing my part perfectly, until the final curtain. By 9, the office was buzzing with activity, though I noticed several curious glances in my direction. Word had clearly spread that something was happening with me today. I maintained my focus, methodically completing documentation tasks I had been assigned. At 10:30, my calendar suddenly filled with urgent requests. A critical bug that needed immediate attention. A client call that couldn't be rescheduled. 3 separate document reviews marked as top priority. The pile-on was so obvious it was almost comical. A transparent attempt to overwhelm me on my final day. I handled each task efficiently, documenting my work with screenshots and email summaries. If they were hoping I'd crack under pressure, or miss something important they could use against me, they would be disappointed. At noon, Rebecca suggested we grab lunch outside the building. Once safely away from prying ears, she updated me on what she had learned. "They've booked the small conference room for your meeting. Not the main one," she said between bites of her sandwich. "Vincent has already prepared your exit paperwork. They have security on standby to escort you out. And get this, they've already begun interviewing for your replacement. Sarah from recruiting accidentally mentioned it to me, not realizing we're friends." I nodded, taking in this information calmly. Any sense of their specific justification? Something about failure to meet leadership expectations and project delays. Complete nonsense, of course. Your team has the highest delivery rate in the company. Rebecca paused, studying my face. "You seem surprisingly calm about all this." I chose my words carefully, not wanting to reveal my secret advantage even to Rebecca. "I've had time to prepare mentally, and I have documentation of my contributions that will be difficult for them to dispute." Back at the office, I received an email from Harold requesting immediate clarification on some financial projections I had submitted months ago. It was clearly a setup, as the original numbers had already been approved and implemented. I crafted a detailed response with supporting data and sent copies to not just Harold but also the entire finance team, establishing a wider record of the exchange. His terse thanks told me I had successfully deflected whatever trap he was setting. At 2 o'clock, I received another calendar update. My 4 p.m. meeting had been moved up to 3:30. They were getting impatient. I used the remaining time to ensure all my personal files were backed up and my workspace was organized. I sent a few farewell emails to team members I genuinely respected, careful to keep the tone positive and professional. At 3:15, I visited the restroom to check my appearance and take a few deep breaths. Looking in the mirror, I reminded myself, the shares are already yours. Nothing they say or do now can change that. At precisely 3:30, I walked into the small conference room. Jeffrey sat at the head of the table with Harold to his right and Vincent to his left. Amanda was notably absent. "Natalie, thanks for joining us." Jeffrey began with faux pleasantness. "Please have a seat." I sat down across from them, placed my notebook on the table, and waited. "We wanted to discuss your role at Tech Fusion," Jeffrey continued, his tone becoming more serious. As you know, the company has evolved significantly since you joined 4 years ago. Harold interjected. Our organizational needs have shifted as we've scaled, particularly in engineering leadership. I nodded but said nothing, forcing them to get to the point without my help. Vincent cleared his throat. After careful consideration of your recent performance and alignment with company goals, we've made the difficult decision to terminate your employment with Tech Fusion effective immediately. Jeffrey leaned forward, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Sorry to say, but we're firing you, he said, unable to completely hide a note of satisfaction. Your access will be revoked today, and security will escort you to collect your belongings. I maintained a neutral expression, though my heart was racing. May I ask about the specific reasons for my termination? I inquired calmly. Harold jumped in. We've documented several instances of project delays and leadership deficiencies over the past quarter. The specific details are outlined in your termination paperwork. I see, I replied evenly. And when is this termination effective? Immediately, or at the end of today? Effective immediately, Vincent confirmed, sliding a folder across the table. Your final paycheck will include salary through today, but obviously excludes any unvested equity. At this, Jeffrey couldn't contain a small chuckle. Timing is everything in business, isn't it? I took the folder and reviewed the documents inside, taking my time while the 3 men watched expectantly. The paperwork indeed specified that my termination was effective immediately April 13th at the time of signing. Just to confirm, I said, looking up from the papers. You're terminating my employment as of today, April 13th. That's correct, Harold said firmly. 1 day before your 4-year anniversary date. I nodded and signed the documents without comment, sliding the folder back across the table. Vincent looked almost disappointed at my lack of reaction. Security will accompany you to your desk to collect your personal items, he stated. That won't be necessary, I replied. I've already packed them up. I just need to retrieve the box under my desk. Jeffrey raised an eyebrow. You were expecting this. I allowed myself a small smile. Let's just say I like to be prepared. The tension in the small conference room was palpable. As I stood to leave, Jeffrey and Harold exchanged satisfied glances, clearly believing their plan had worked perfectly. Vincent gathered the signed termination papers with methodical precision, placing them back in the folder. I'll escort you to your desk, Vincent offered, his tone professionally detached. Thank you, I replied, maintaining my composure despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. As we walked through the open office space, I could feel curious eyes following us. Everyone knew what a meeting with the CEO, CFO, and HR director meant, especially when followed by an escort to your desk. Rebecca caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle nod of encouragement. At my desk, I retrieved the cardboard box of personal items I had placed underneath that morning. It contained framed photos, a few books, my special coffee mug, and other mementos from 4 years of dedicated work. Harold appeared beside us, apparently unwilling to miss the satisfaction of seeing me leave. I'll need your badge and laptop before you go, he said, extending his hand. I handed over both items without protest. As Harold took the laptop, he couldn't resist adding, "The company appreciates your contributions, but we must always make decisions based on financial prudence." The irony of his statement nearly made me laugh out loud. Instead, I simply nodded. Vincent guided me toward the exit, but before we reached the doors, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen to see it was Thomas, my broker. Under normal circumstances, I would have let it go to voicemail, but today was different. "Excuse me, I need to take this call. It's my financial advisor," I said to Vincent, stepping slightly away. "Natalie, just checking in to confirm. You received my text this morning. The shares have fully vested in your account, as of midnight. Congratulations on joining the $9 million club." Thomas's voice was cheerful and just loud enough that both Vincent and Harold, who was still hovering nearby, could hear. "Yes, I received your message, Thomas. Thank you for confirming that my shares vested at midnight last night. I replied, clearly watching Harold's expression shift from smug satisfaction to confusion. What did you just say? Harold demanded, moving closer. I turned to face him directly. My shares vested at 12:01 a.m. today, as specified in my contract. The vesting was based on calendar days, not business days, and occurred at midnight on the day before my 4-year anniversary date. Harold's face drained of color. That's impossible. The vesting date is April 14th. Yes. And according to my contract, the shares vest at 12:01 a.m. on that date, which was midnight last night. I explained calmly. My brother-in-law is a corporate attorney. He modified that clause before I signed 4 years ago. Vincent frantically pulled out his phone, presumably to check the contract language. Harold was already rushing back toward the conference room where Jeffrey was still waiting. I followed at a measured pace, Vincent trailing behind me. When we re-entered the conference room, Jeffrey was on his feet, his expression thunderous. What's this about your shares already vesting? He demanded. It's quite simple, I replied, taking a seat uninvited. My contract specifically states that equity vests at 12:01 a.m. on the calendar day of the vesting date, not at business close. My brother-in-law, who reviewed my contract before I signed it, added that language. The shares legally vested 7 hours before you terminated me. Jeffrey grabbed the contract from Vincent and scanned it frantically, his face growing redder by the second. Harold was already on his phone, presumably calling the legal department. This is some kind of trick, Jeffrey sputtered. You can't just change standard vesting terms. I didn't change anything. Tech Fusion accepted these terms when the company countersigned the agreement 4 years ago. The language is quite clear. Harold ended his call and looked at Jeffrey with undisguised panic. She's right. Legal confirms the contract specifies 12:01 a.m. on the vesting date. The shares are already hers. The door burst open, and a breathless Amanda rushed in. Is it true? She asked, looking between Jeffrey and me. Before anyone could respond, Harold's assistant Beth appeared at the door. Sir, the stock administration team just confirmed a block of restricted shares converted to common stock in Miss Armstrong's name at midnight. It's already been reported to the SEC. Harold sank into a chair, his face ashen. How did she play us? He whispered to no one in particular, his voice trembling with what sounded like the beginning of tears. The room fell into stunned silence. Jeffrey stood frozen, contract in hand, his carefully constructed plan collapsing around him. Vincent looked like he might be ill. Amanda's expression was unreadable, somewhere between shock and what might have been respect. I allowed myself a moment to savor the scene before standing up. If there's nothing else, I believe my termination is still effective immediately. I'll be on my way. No one moved to stop me as I picked up my box of belongings and walked toward the door. At the threshold, I paused and turned back. For what it's worth, I would have stayed if you had just treated me fairly. The algorithm that made this company successful could have been just the beginning of what I might have created here. I looked each of them in the eye before concluding. Sometimes the smartest financial decision is simply to honor your commitments. As the door closed behind me, I heard Jeffrey's roar of frustration and the sound of papers being thrown. Walking through the office one last time, head held high with my box of belongings, I caught Rebecca's eye again. She gave me a subtle thumbs up. Outside in the parking lot, my phone pinged with a text message from her. Whatever just happened in there, I heard Harold shouting all the way across the office. Drinks later, you can tell me everything. For the first time in weeks, I smiled a genuine smile. The $9 million was life-changing, certainly, but the satisfaction of outwitting those who had tried to cheat me was in that moment even sweeter. As I placed the box in my car and slid into the driver's seat, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just transpired. 4 years of work, countless innovations, late nights, and sacrifices had culminated in this moment of vindication. I had won, but the victory was bittersweet, tainted by the betrayal of people I had once respected and trusted. I started the car and drove away from Tech Fusion for the last time, already thinking about what would come next in my journey. The 24 hours following my dramatic exit from Tech Fusion were a whirlwind. By that evening, my personal email was flooded with messages from former colleagues, some expressing shock, others sharing information about the chaos I had left in my wake. Rebecca called me as promised. "You would not believe what happened after you left," she began without preamble. "There was an emergency executive meeting that lasted 3 hours. The legal team was running around like headless chickens. Harold locked himself in his office and wouldn't come out." I sipped my champagne, listening from the comfort of my living room, where Michael had arranged an impromptu celebration. "What about Jeffrey?" "Completely unhinged," Rebecca reported. "He was shouting so loud the entire floor could hear him through the supposedly soundproof conference room walls. Something about incompetent contract review and heads rolling." While part of me enjoyed hearing about the fallout, another part felt strangely hollow. Despite everything I had poured my heart and soul into Tech Fusion for 4 years, the vindication was satisfying, but the betrayal still stung. The next morning I woke to a voicemail from Tech Fusion's General Counsel, Catherine Thompson, requesting an urgent discussion regarding your separation agreement. I forwarded it to James and Elizabeth without returning the call. "Let them sweat," Elizabeth advised when we spoke later. "They're probably scrambling to find some loophole, but the vesting has already occurred. The shares are in your account. They have no leverage." By noon, news of my departure had somehow reached the technology press. My phone lit up with requests for comment from journalists. I declined them all, preferring to let Tech Fusion deal with the public relations aspect. On day 3, the company's desperation became more evident. An email arrived from Jeffrey himself, the tone markedly different from his smug attitude during our last meeting. "Natalie, I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding your position at Tech Fusion. I would appreciate the opportunity to discuss a potential path forward that would benefit all parties. We value your contributions and would like to resolve this situation amicably." James reviewed the message and laughed. Classic damage control. They're terrified about how this looks to other employees and investors. A senior engineer being fired the day before. A massive equity vesting only to have outsmarted them. It's a PR nightmare, and a potential legal liability for breach of good faith. He was right. By the end of the week, Tech Fusion stock had dropped 7% as rumors circulated about executive mismanagement and potential litigation. Analysts were asking questions about the company's treatment of key talent and the possible impact on innovation. 10 days after my termination, I received a formal settlement offer. Tech Fusion proposed additional compensation in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement about the circumstances of my departure. The figure they offered was substantial, nearly $2 million on top of my vested shares. Elizabeth and James both advised me to consider it carefully. The NDA would prevent you from telling this story publicly, but it would also provide additional financial security, Elizabeth pointed out. After thoughtful consideration, I declined the offer. The $9 million from my vested shares was more than enough, and maintaining my ability to speak truthfully about my experience felt more valuable than additional money. As weeks passed, the emotional impact of the ordeal began to surface. Despite my financial victory, I found myself processing feelings of betrayal and disillusionment. I had believed in Tech Fusion's mission and had formed what I thought were genuine relationships. The revelation that I was viewed merely as an expense to be minimized, rather than a valuable contributor, was deeply hurtful. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Laura Bennett, to work through these feelings. "What you're experiencing is a form of grief," she explained. "You're mourning not just the job but the loss of a community and an identity you had built over 4 years." Around the 1-month mark, Amanda reached out via personal email asking to meet for coffee. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe in a neighboring town. She looked tired, with new lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I want to apologize," she began. "I knew what they were planning and I didn't warn you. I told myself it was business, not personal, but that was a coward's justification." "Why didn't you stand up for me?" I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind. Amanda stared into her coffee. "Fear mostly. Jeffrey and Harold had begun questioning my value to the company too. I was protecting my own position. She looked up, her expression pained. I've resigned since then. I couldn't continue working in an environment that treats people that way. Her apology didn't erase the hurt, but it did provide some closure. As we parted, she mentioned that several other executives were also leaving Tech Fusion, including Vincent. And Harold? I couldn't help asking. A small smile played at Amanda's lips. The board forced him to resign 2 weeks ago. Apparently, the $9 million mistake was the last straw after several questionable financial decisions. Rebecca called me regularly with updates from inside Tech Fusion. The company was undergoing a major restructuring, with Jeffrey fighting to maintain control amid growing board concerns. They're calling it a cultural reset, she informed me. There's all this talk about valuing employees and creating a supportive environment. Too little too late, if you ask me. 6 weeks after my departure, Rebecca decided to leave as well. I can't work for people who would do what they did to you, she explained. Besides, I've got a better offer. That better offer became the seed of our next venture together. With part of my windfall, I decided to fund a startup focused on ethical AI applications with Rebecca as my co-founder. We named it Principled Algorithms, a subtle nod to the values that Tech Fusion had abandoned. As news of our new company spread, we were approached by several former Tech Fusion engineers, eager to join a more values-aligned organization. Each new hire felt like reclaiming a piece of what had been lost, rebuilding a community based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. 3 months after my termination, Tech Fusion announced that Jeffrey would be stepping down as CEO to be replaced by an external candidate with a reputation for ethical leadership. The press release cited a desire to realign company values with employee well-being and sustainable innovation. Reading the announcement, I felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication tinged with sadness for what might have been had Tech Fusion's leadership made different choices. The company I had helped build was being forced to change because of how they had treated me and likely others before me. As I closed the browser window on that chapter of my professional life, I turned my attention to the business plan for Principled Algorithms. The experience had taught me valuable lessons about corporate culture, equity structures, and the importance of legal precision, all of which I was determined to apply in building something better. The $9 million had secured my financial future, but the true value of the experience was in the wisdom it had imparted. Success built on betrayal and greed is ultimately unsustainable. In our new venture, integrity would be non-negotiable. 1 year after the dramatic showdown at Tech Fusion, I sat on the rooftop patio of Principled Algorithms' new office space, watching the sunset paint the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. Our company had grown from an idea born of betrayal into a thriving enterprise with 27 employees and a strong ethical foundation. The journey to healing had not been linear. For months after leaving Tech Fusion, I experienced what my therapist, Dr. Bennett, identified as symptoms of workplace trauma, anxiety, trust issues, and a persistent feeling of being undervalued despite my success. Corporate betrayal can be as impactful as personal betrayal, she explained during one of our sessions. You spent more waking hours with these people than with your family. The violation of that trust affects how you view all professional relationships. She was right. In the early days of Principled Algorithms, I found myself obsessively documenting everything, preparing for betrayals that weren't coming. Rebecca often had to gently remind me that we had created this company precisely to escape that toxic environment. We're not them, Nat, she would say. We're building something different here. Gradually, with professional help and the supportive community we were creating, the hypervigilance began to fade. I learned to trust again, not blindly, but with healthy boundaries and clear expectations. The financial security provided by my Tech Fusion shares allowed me to approach our new venture with patience and intention. Unlike many startups forced to chase rapid growth to satisfy investors, we could focus on building sustainably and in alignment with our values. We implemented transparent equity policies where every employee understood exactly what their shares were worth and when they would vest. Our legal documents were written in plain language, not the deliberately obtuse legalese that often hides inequitable terms. 6 months into our new company, I received an unexpected email from Harold Peterson, Tech Fusion's former CFO. I almost deleted it unread, but curiosity won out. "Natalie," it began, "I owe you an apology. What we attempted to do to you was not just bad business, but morally wrong. The board cited the incident as the primary reason for my termination, but truthfully, I had already lost my way long before that day. The pursuit of financial optimization at any cost had corrupted my judgment and values. I'm writing not to ask forgiveness, but to acknowledge the wrong, and to let you know that your stand forced me to reconsider how I conduct business and treat people." I never responded to the email, but it provided a certain closure. The knowledge that even Harold had recognized the moral bankruptcy of their actions validated what I had known all along. I was not just fighting for money, but for basic fairness and dignity. Our company's first product launch came exactly 1 year after my Tech Fusion departure. We had developed an AI ethics compliance tool that helped organizations identify bias in their algorithms, a direct response to issues I had observed, but been unable to address at my former company. The launch was successful beyond our projections, with several major tech companies signing on as early clients. The industry was finally waking up to the importance of ethical AI development, and we were positioned at the forefront of this movement. As our team celebrated the successful launch, I found myself reflecting on how differently things might have turned out had Tech Fusion simply honored their commitment. The algorithm that made them millions could have been followed by innovations that made them billions. Amanda, who had become an occasional mentor to our growing company, summarized it perfectly during one of our coffee meetings. Their short-sightedness cost them far more than $9 million. It cost them their best innovator, their ethical compass, and ultimately their leadership positions. Tech Fusion was still operating, but its stock had never fully recovered from the executive exodus and the cultural damage that had been exposed. They had recently been surpassed by a competitor, using technology remarkably similar to what I had been developing before my departure. Using part of my windfall, I established a scholarship fund for women in technology, focusing particularly on business and legal education, alongside technical skills. I wanted to ensure that the next generation of female engineers would understand not just how to build amazing technology, but how to protect their interests in the companies that profited from their innovations. The scholarship's first recipient, a brilliant computer science student named Jasmine Taylor, reminded me of myself at that age, passionate and trusting. During our mentorship sessions, I made sure to balance encouraging her natural optimism with practical wisdom about navigating corporate environments. Technical skills alone aren't enough, I would tell her. Understanding the business and legal aspects of technology is what ultimately protects your ability to create on your own terms. Rebecca and I instituted a profit-sharing program at Principled Algorithms, ensuring that everyone who contributed to our success would benefit from it regardless of their initial equity grants. We created a company culture where transparency was the default, not the exception. On particularly challenging days when the demands of running a startup felt overwhelming, I would remind myself of that conference room at Tech Fusion, of Jeffrey's smug smile as he fired me one day too late. Those memories, once painful, had transformed into fuel for building something better. Michael, whose unwavering support had been my foundation throughout the ordeal, often remarked on the positive changes he observed in me. "You've always been brilliant and driven," he said one evening, as we walked our newly adopted dog Apollo through the neighborhood. "But now there's a confidence that comes from knowing you've been tested and emerged stronger." 2 years after leaving Tech Fusion, I was invited to give a keynote speech at a major technology conference, the same one where Amanda had first recruited me. My talk, titled "Ethical Innovation Building Technology Companies Worth Working For," drew on my experiences without directly naming Tech Fusion. After the presentation, a young engineer approached me. "Your story changed how I negotiated my last job offer," she said. "I had my lawyer review everything, especially the equity terms. The company actually respected me more for it." These moments of impact reinforced what had become clear to me through this journey. Sometimes our most painful experiences become our most valuable teachers if we have the courage to learn from them and share those lessons with others. The $9 million that Tech Fusion had tried to deny me had secured my financial future, but the true wealth I had gained was in wisdom, purpose, and the opportunity to build something aligned with my values. As I reflect on this journey, I realize that what happened at Tech Fusion wasn't just about clever contract language or vesting schedules. It was about recognizing your worth and standing firm when others try to diminish it. It was about understanding that true success isn't measured by stock prices or valuations, but by the integrity with which you conduct business and treat people. Have you ever stood up for yourself when others tried to take advantage of you? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you found value in my experience, please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more insights on navigating the corporate world with both savvy and integrity. Remember, sometimes the most important battle is the one you fight for your own worth. Thank you for listening, and I hope my journey inspires you to stand strong in yours.